as well. But listen, if you have a third consecutive head coach that fails from a recruiting standpoint, at a certain point, you do kind of become, unfortunately, what Tennessee has become, where, you have to be pretty old to remember Tennessee being really good. And you certainly have to be very old to think of Tennessee as like one of these sort of top shelf programs. Like I am, in my 40s. I go back to being a high school kid in the 90s. That's Nebraska. It's Tennessee. It's Florida State. A lot of programs like that in Miami, on kind of the top shelf of the sport there at that time. I have, pretty vivid memories of that era. But if you're 30s, certainly if you're in your 20s, you really have no memory of that at all. So when I think about my own life of, okay, so what happened in college football before I was alive to know it? Like a lot of that stuff seems like it might as well have been 200 years ago because it happened before I was born. And that's the same connection that some people have to Tennessee. The Peyton Manning era, the 1998. When folks think about Manning family here in 2022, I don't think they think of the University of Tennessee, even though Peyton being at Tennessee is a vivid memory from me growing up as a college football fan. But if you focus tested the name Manning with a lot of football fans now and say, hey, what comes to mind? I think you're going to get a lot of stuff being mentioned before anybody mentions, oh, yeah, Peyton also went to Tennessee. That may be a big deal to Tennessee fans themselves, but that's not a big part of the sort of collective memory of the current crop of football fans because so many of them are just way too young to have remembered that. They don't think of Tennessee as being a power. And if Florida's not careful, Tim Tebow is going to become a version of that too, just an ancient part of history that you have to have a little bit of gray in your hair to have any memory of whatsoever. Are we on the other platforms now? So good morning to you on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We'll get ready to get started here. Coming up in just a moment, fun show, a lot of recruiting. Mike Griffith stops by. Some interesting words from Jeremy Pruitt, who was with Mike on the Beat on Monday. Pruitt is one of those guys that, frankly, I have some respect for as a coach. Clearly, he's a sharp defensive mind. I think his tenure here at UGA is, frankly, pretty disgraceful in terms of the turmoil, the impact that he, kind of brought on the end of the Richt era there. I blame him for a lot of that. But generally speaking, I think of Pruitt as a pretty sharp football guy, so his words will carry some weight with us here in just a moment. We'll do that. Let me get a couple more comments before we get there. Let's see what else is going on. Yeah, Randy Hall mentioning envision this linebacker trio of Raylan Wilson, Trey Bowles, and C.J. Allen. I think there's a very good chance that's what it could end up being. And my, oh my, what a collection of talent that would be if that's indeed the case. For sure. For sure. DT says the next DawgNation Daily will be the biggest ever. Yeah, that was. If you're just joining us, we were talking earlier about how it seems like in recruiting, it's a little bit like pro wrestling that we're always looking ahead to the next month as the month where you've really got to be paying attention, and there's a certain level of kind of regenerating hype that seems to take place around that. And admittedly, I'm probably certainly prone to do some of that kind of stuff with DawgNation Daily there as well, or I certainly like the idea of that. There's just always a certain sort of carnival barker thing I'm sort of comfortable with. I like sideshows. I like state fairs. I just like, sort of big garish things. I do. Hemingway says, glad that we were able to get the show up and running today. Yeah, for those of you that are just joining us, we almost had a little bit of an issue with our DawgNation.com platform. Got that fixed, got that squared away, and got that up and running. He says that he's been away for a few days whitewater kayaking. That's really fun. What a great thing to do this time of year. And I get the sense that's what everybody's kind of doing right now. And different people do different things. Like for some it's golf, for some it's fishing, for some it's golf and fishing. For other people, it's being on the lake or being on the river, doing a little kayaking, doing a little whitewater rafting, or going to Disney or whatever your summer thing is that you like to enjoy. You certainly seem like a lot of folks going to the beach, of course. You certainly seem like a lot of folks trying to get all that in now, soak up that summer and enjoy it because, listen, the football season is going to be here before you know it. Going to be here before you know it. Hemingway also says recruiting is fun, but we're 66 days away from Oregon. Can't wait for 2022 season to get underway. Yeah. I'll tell you this, to go back to our whole idea of coming up the biggest ever. Well, I've had some really fun conversations over the last couple of days involving the Oregon game. I am actually really, really excited about some of the stuff we're going to be doing for that, and I can't wait to tell you more about that, and I can't wait to personally invite you to be a part of it with us. Also, I found out yesterday about another big event we've got coming up here pretty soon there as well, as a way of getting together in person, celebrating the start of the season. I can't tell you about that yet. I kind of sort of let slip something a moment ago. I wasn't maybe supposed to. This I definitely cannot tell you about, but we have some really fun, big announcements on the horizon, and I'm really excited about it. I tell you, it's just coming together behind the scenes really, really well. Keith Finney says I sound different on 960 The Ref than I do here. I make an appearance there every Wednesday morning. Show also airs there at noon there, too. I wonder if that's because I'm speaking into the phone or as opposed to speaking into my microphone here. Maybe that's the case. But Keith, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So great stuff. We got to get going. It's a little bit late. Recruiting off the top. I think, listen, I've said all kinds of crazy stuff over the years. Some of it obviously doesn't come true because no one's prediction is going to be 100% accurate. But there was a prediction that I made a few months ago that I do believe stands a pretty good chance of eventually being true. And we'll talk about that and kind of tie that into the big recruiting news of the day. Mike Griffith coming by there as well. We'll cover a couple of pieces of recruiting here on the show today and have a lot of fun in between. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I would say that things are starting to get pretty interesting when it comes to Georgia and its 2023 recruiting class, and you have seen lots of evidence of movement in the right direction with some key recruits, and maybe another big domino fell yesterday. Now, this in itself is not obviously and inherently good news for UGA, but you don't have to look very far on the internet to kind of find out what dog fans, plugged-in folks, are kind of saying about the decommitment of Raylan Wilson, a linebacker from Tallahassee who's been committed to Michigan. But that is no longer true. Let me show you this from Wilson on social media. And also, as I pull this up, remind you to check out Jeff Sintel at DawgNation.com. Good story with some quotes from Wilson in it last night at DawgNation.com if you want a kind of a reboot on kind of where all this stands and why this is a big deal. But Raylan Wilson says, respect my decision. He's got the edit here from Hayes Fawcett, the talented young man that works for On3. The quote is, I want to thank Coach Harbaugh and the whole Michigan staff for welcoming me with open arms. But at this time, I'd like to step back from my commitment and explore my options a little bit more. That from Raylan Wilson. Of course, the Tallahassee Lincoln program, historically one of the better programs here in the Southeast. That's where he goes to school. Was going to go to Michigan, but now that's not the case. A lot of Georgia folks seem to think this could be good news for UGA. He's visited Florida a couple times there as well, but Florida ain't winning with no recruits these days. Bad grammar intentional. So that sort of leads you to believe that Georgia might be in a pretty good spot. And I got a few thoughts about this. Thought number one is, I think it's probably safe to assume if you travel way up north to Ann Arbor, I don't think those Michigan folks want to see Georgia anytime soon in any form or fashion for as long as life goes on. And it's hard not to see this recruiting battle playing out. And we should point out not everybody follows this stuff quite as closely. Like, Raylan Wilson is not committed to Georgia, and this is not an announcement that he's going to Georgia, but the decommitment from Michigan for a lot of folks sort of feels like the precursor to what could end up being a pledge to UGA. A lot of Michigan fans feel the same way. And it is hard to think about all of this without think about having been in South Florida, Miami, around the time of the Orange Bowl. I've told you a million times. It's like when you go back and relive that portion of Georgia football history, it's very easy to fixate on the national championship game and the national championship game alone and what Georgia did finally vanquishing its longtime arch nemesis, Alabama. And you should go back and rewatch that as much as you possibly can and enjoy the memorabilia that you brought back or the gear that you've purchased or look back through your phone and scroll back through those pictures. You should do that all the time. But for those of you who are lucky enough to have been in Miami for the Orange Bowl, or for those of you who have just vivid memories of watching that game on television, when you recollect on the great season for Georgia, looking back on that Orange Bowl, I think has got to be a part of that there as well. This was a truly special moment for UGA that set up the opportunity to finally beat Alabama, because in the aftermath of having lost Alabama in the SEC championship game, man, the conversation around Georgia football was quite different than it eventually would be. Georgia fans themselves were obviously a little bit down on their own team, but there were a lot of people who thought Michigan was going to win there that day. And when you got to Hard Rock Stadium there that afternoon, getting ready for that game there that night, you saw a very different scene than we have grown used to seeing when it comes to Georgia and these big games outside of the estate here. We're normally used to seeing kind of a DawgNation invasion, sort of a stadium takeover by UGA. But that day, there were tens upon tens of thousands of Michigan folks there. Maize and blue as far as the eye could see. And all of those Michigan folks really and truly thought they were going to win the game against Georgia. And for those of you that remember the post-game show that we did from inside the stadium there that evening, you know, there was a big group of Michigan folks who had even like rented out the stadium for like a New Year's Eve celebration after the game. And I think they literally thought it was going to be this huge celebration party. It turned out to be like the most awkward thing in the world, like the DJ music blaring, but no Michigan fan feeling like dancing. But listen, at this point in time, you've bought the stadium. You might as well try to get some use out of it. The whole thing was so awkward. And the sense that you got leaving Hard Rock there that night was Michigan fans really openly admitted they felt really dumb for ever thinking their team could have played on the field with the overall athleticism for Georgia. And what was the line? Was it Apollo Creed from the original Rocky who said there ain't going to be no rematch? I think Michigan fans walked out of Hard Rock that night saying, we're not interested in any future rematches. We've sort of learned all we need to know about our team for right now, tucking tail between legs, heading back up to the Great White North. And now back here in a recruiting battle situation again, seeing Georgia seemingly flexing in such a big way to pull Wilson away from his Michigan commitment and maybe becoming such a big factor of eventually leading to a commitment from Wilson to UGA. I think the Michigan folks are just about done with UGA. And I think the honest ones would openly admit that they're kind of in their own right. But when you also think about how potentially, if Wilson were to come to Georgia, how he fits into the situation here, I think it leads to something really pretty cool, because I think that Raylan Wilson, the best that I can tell, is a really good player. But it's not just him. I mean, you certainly get the impression that Georgia has a chance of putting together a historic collection of linebackers here for this 2023 class. And historic is kind of a heavy word, and sometimes it has the tendency to feel overused or maybe overstated. But, I mean, to think that you could get a Wilson to go along with what you've already got in the class, C.J. Allen, there's a lot to like about C.J. Allen. There seems to be some positive movement, if you pay attention to internet chatter, online chatter, between Georgia and Trey Bowles, the son of Todd Bowles, the Bucs coach. I mean, if you're telling me that Georgia has a chance to pull a trio of linebackers like Trey Bowles and maybe Raylan Wilson, already C.J. Allen, y'all, it's not a stretch to say that really reminds you of the trio that Georgia just lost of last year's team: Quay Walker, Channing Tindall, and Nakobe Dean. Now, all those guys would have to play and play well to live up to that, but all of them would be kind of expected to do some version of that. It's a level of success that Georgia's enjoying in recruiting, I would say, because of how good its defense was a year ago. And all of a sudden there's this proof of concept where all of a sudden you don't have linebackers worried about other linebackers and too many linebackers, in one position group for me to find my success. I mean, you just don't have that. Quay Walker kind of played in the shadow of Nakobe Dean, but he himself became a first-round pick this past year. Channing Tindall really wasn't even a starter for UGA, but had NFL teams salivating over the chance to have him on their roster. It's just the kind of success that Georgia has enjoyed at that position, and obviously big-time guys want to be a part of it. And in fact, there are other linebackers that you would think would maybe also like to be at UGA too, but they just may not be able to even get that opportunity because there simply isn't room. One of the oldest cliches in the book is spots are tight when it comes to recruiting, but in the case of UGA, especially at the linebacker spot, it certainly seems like there are more talented players who'd like to be at UGA, and obviously in a perfect world, Georgia would bring them all in. But when you have, at least some limitations on what you can sign, Georgia in a situation like right now where there are truly more great linebacking prospects that want to come to Georgia than there are spots available for them. But at the very least, if Georgia signs 3 of these guys this year, all 3 of the guys that it signs, Allen and maybe Raylan Wilson, you would certainly hope for Trey Bowles, all of them might end up being really good players. And it sort of leads me to something that I've said before, that the reputation of the Georgia 2021 defense was really undeniable. That it was one of those things that I don't know this steam had really built up before the season began. I don't know if that was the case. But certainly by the time the season was really humming along, everybody became very keenly aware right away that this was more than just a good defensive unit coached by a defensive-minded guy in Kirby Smart. And this is more than just sort of the typical, dominant defense the SEC seems to have at least one of each and every year. This was something that likely had the strong possibility of being remembered as a truly historic unit. In fact, you want to go back to relatively early in the season, maybe one of the funniest, most honest and raw moments of the year when Shane Beamer, the South Carolina coach, was being questioned about, what happened to his team in terms of trying to keep pace offensively with what Georgia was doing defensively. I think Beamer laid it out about as clear as anybody could about just how daunting the task was of going up against the Georgia defense. And for Georgia fans who enjoyed every moment of this, this robust description of what made Georgia different is the kind of thing that Georgia fans certainly loved to hear when it was said and still like hearing it now. This was Shane Beamer back during the season.
They've got like 105-star football players on their defense. They have a defensive lineman that weighs 340 pounds and runs better than everybody on this call. They've got 5-star defensive backs. They're big and physical and fast. I mean, other than that, they're really freaking good. That's why they have the top defense in the country. They're hard to run the football on. So there wasn't some magical scheme they came out with tonight. They got 5-star recruits everywhere, and they play really physical. Damn.
So I think that's really funny. I think that Beamer's got a good way with the media. He just has a very kind of honest way of speaking genuineness to the words that he uses, and I think that's kind of funny. And it does, I think, stand as a representation of what a lot of people think about when they think about UGA from this past season. In fact, some people take all of that a step further, and they'll say, yeah, this Georgia defense was the best in the country last year. Some would say it's the best of all time. I don't know if it is or it isn't. It's at least a conversation, and you got some evidence and some argument, ammunition on your side if you're going to argue UGA for that. And then the next place some people take it is, and nobody will ever be that good again. Or in particular, that Georgia defensively will never, ever be able to be as good as it was in 2021. And that's where, I've kind of stepped in and said, I'm not quite so sure about that. Now, listen, let me admit something here for a moment. When you speak into a microphone for a living, there's a tendency to want to be louder and louder and louder every single day, and kind of it's just sort of fun to sort of spew hot takes, and it's just kind of, we've said before that the language that sports fans use, their way of showing their love for sports is to argue about it. And one of the best ways to kind of create a good argument is to make a bold statement, bold prediction, bold claim, hot take, if you will, and kind of have it out with people who may have a different opinion. That's just kind of what sports fans do. And when you do that a lot, obviously you're going to get a lot of these wrong. I get stuff wrong all the time. And I told you for weeks I thought Arch Manning was coming to Georgia. Turns out that wasn't the case. I don't like getting things wrong, but you just sort of shake it off and you move on to the next thing. However, I don't get them all wrong. And I think an opinion that I've expressed over the course of the last few months, I think is starting to show some evidence that it might eventually become true. Because what I said, and I said this very early in the calendar year of 2022, and have repeated a few times since then, what I have said is that the ultimate legacy of the 2021 defense, 5 first-round draft picks, all of the statistical feats it accomplished during the year, the ultimate legacy of Georgia's 2021 defense is I think it lays the foundation for a defense at Georgia to eventually be even better than this group was right now. I really believe that's the case. And I think you're starting to see some evidence of that. Look at what Georgia did with its 2022 recruiting class. Has any program ever had a better collection of defensive backs than Slim Singletary and Dalen Everett and Malachi Starks and Julian Humphrey, and on you go? That's about as good as you can get. And yet you've also got these premier edge rusher type guys, in one case more of a defensive lineman, but Mikael Williams and Marvin Jones Jr., these are These are the kind of top shelf recruits that anybody would want. And anytime Georgia got two of them the same year to go along with a historic haul of defensive backs. And all of a sudden now, fresh off the Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, Channing Tindall triumvirate there at the linebacker spot, all of a sudden you start to see the makings of what could be a similar grouping here for the class of 2023 when it comes to linebackers there too. That pretty obviously the success that Georgia enjoyed defensively in 2021 has created kind of a proof of concept, a comparative spec, where a lot of future recruits say, I want to go to this place because I saw what this player did on the 2021 defense, and I want to have those same results. I want to get paid like that guy's being paid in the NFL. I want to have the kind of stats that guy had while he was in college. I want to contribute to a national championship the way that guy did in college. I want to have that same kind of career. Therefore, I want to go to Georgia. And by the way, whoever that guy is in that comparison could be a whole number of people. It could be one of the linebackers, like we said before. It could be one of the defensive linemen, like Trayvon, number 1 overall pick. Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, both first-round picks. It could be any number of things there as well, across the defense. But there are a lot of guys who say, hey, I want to be the next one of those dudes. I want to make the safe, easy choice of going to a place that's going to use me as well as Georgia used all those guys in 2021. You don't have to worry about, being too crowded for you to find your opportunity or too many guys kind of pulling the spotlight away for you. Georgia showed in 2021 there's enough glory to go around. And because they had so much success, I believe they set up another defense to eventually be even better than the defense was in 2021. As outrageous a claim as that sort of seems to be at face value, dig deeper, I don't quite think it's quite as outrageous as you might imagine when you look at the kind of recruiting dividends that have already been paid and the groundwork that's being laid for even more of those announcements coming up over the course of the next few weeks. I think you see the evidence of that. The Georgia defense in 2021 was historic. Different people may debate whether it was the best of all time, but I think eventually Kirby Smart may produce one that's even better. And some of the recruits that Georgia signed in 2022 and some of the guys that could be set to join in 2023 could end up being a very big part of that. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. We're glad to have you today, no matter how you get to us. Live on video, 9:45 at DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. Boy, we came within an eyelash of not being on that platform today. Connor Riley's producing for us all week long today. Happy to have him here, and thankful that he was able to kind of get that mess cleaned up. And we're up and running and ready to go, and glad about that. Of course, all the other platforms there too. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. It's just really fun to be able to deliver the show to you live on video each and every day. I'm not smart enough to know how it gets done, but I'm happy somebody figures it out and happy I'm able to speak to you. And we can have this fun Georgia football conversation as the summer rolls on here. Of course, a lot of you listening there on the radio at Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref every day at noon. I'm glad to have you there for that. Podcast, anytime you want to, all kinds of podcast platforms. A lot of fun there, too. And, of course, a big thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management for making it all possible. Breda Pest Management, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That means they're taking care of all those big venues there around Athens, including Sanford Stadium and all the other athletic venues there, too. That means, listen, they're known for top-notch service and all the things associated with that. They're known for taking really good care of you. They're known for supporting UGA. It's kind of fun to support those that support UGA. But here's what I want to make sure you know them for right now more than anything else. You've got a pest control provider maybe in your life that's sending you that letter every single year, communicating with you, your service is going up. We're giving you, a new bill, higher price, like everything else, seemingly it's going to cost you more this year than it cost you a year before. At a certain point in time, you're just ready for all that kind of stuff to stop. Well, here's how you can make that stop. You can make the switch to Breda Pest Management, and you're going to save money instantly when you make that choice. That's what they're able to do for you. They're able to put more money in your pocket right away by giving you a better price and a better deal on your termite protection, your pest control service. Breda Pest Management is going to take really good care of you on all of that. So please make sure you check him out online. Matt Breda is a great dude. He's a big sports fan, loves UGA, see him at Braves games and stuff all the time. Just a good guy. And he's got a great team, 100-something people that have been doing this kind of stuff going all the way back to the 1970s. They know how to take good care of you. And right now they know how to do it for a better price than the pest control provider who's probably charging more than they should be, Breda Pest Management is not going to be that way. Check them out, BredaPest.com. Now, let me spell it for you. If you're listening, radio podcast, or if you're just not looking at your screen right now, BREDA. That's BredaPest.com, BREDA. That'll get you in touch with them. Really good stuff from our folks at Breda Pest Management. All right, we're going to talk to Mike Griffith here in a moment. A lot going on around UGA. We'll get some thoughts from him about all of that. Mike also had a very interesting conversation on Monday with former SEC coach, head coach Tennessee, defensive coordinator at a couple different spots, including UGA, Jeremy Pruitt. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Pruitt's one of those guys that I don't have the world's best memories of his tenure here at UGA. I think he's obviously a sharp defensive mind. I think that he was, really a lot of the stuff that I think went on there in 2015, I think he bears a lot of the blame for. And I think it was kind of an ugly chapter in Georgia's football history. But listen, Pruitt's also been a guy that's been deeply entrenched in the world of college football for a long time, was Jimbo Fisher's defensive coordinator at Florida State, came to UGA, obviously, was the replacement for Kirby Smart as defensive coordinator at Alabama and head coach there at Tennessee. So his opinion on a lot of topics matters. And Mike Griffith had him on Monday. And the subject came up of, we talked before about historic Georgia defense and all the great talent that Georgia had last season, obviously winning the national championship. And Mike asked Jeremy, well, how do you move on from that? How do you, how do you get back to the business of competing in the shadow of the success that you enjoyed a year ago and so many of the players that contributed to that success no longer being here? I thought that Pruitt had an interesting answer. Let me give you this from Mike's On the Beat, Jeremy Pruitt here on the DawgNation video channels on Monday night.
Obviously, Georgia's been recruiting at a very high level, so there's still a lot of really good football players at Georgia. And you probably, or not probably, you know them a lot better than I do, Mike. But there's something about having experience. And one of the most important things is experience at quarterback, and Georgia has that. They've got experience at quarterback. They've recruited well on the offensive line. They have explosive players on offense. As long as Kirby's at Georgia, they're going to play good defense. It may be a different group each year. Maybe the D-line may be a little stronger than the inside backers this year just because experience, or maybe the secondary. But they're going to play good defense, and they'll figure out a way to do it. It might look a little different, but you can bet they'll be there when it counts.
I love that phrase from Pruitt there at the end, that Georgia's going to be there, he says, when it counts. And I don't know specifically what he was meaning by that, but I know what I mean when I say something like that. It's about being back in that postseason conversation come December and January. You look at the history of the college football playoff, which dates back to 2014. Every national champion in the playoff era but two were back in the playoff again the following year. And I think at a sort of a baseline goal, that ought to be the mission for Georgia. Find a way to navigate the regular season. I would say that's certainly a little easier to do this year than it might be for some teams in certain situations. Georgia's a big favorite in all the regular season games that it plays. He sets up a big showdown against Alabama in the SEC championship. Maybe that's where all the marbles. Maybe it's like last year where both those teams, regardless of the result, get a chance to move on to the college football playoff. But one way or another, being back in the playoff conversation, give yourself that chance. What do they say in poker? Having a chip and a chair. Give yourself a chair at the table, have a stack in front of you, and a chance to go all in for a chance to win another national championship. Listen to Jeremy Pruitt on Monday night. Sounds like he thinks Georgia might have the opportunity to do just that. Pretty interesting stuff. You can check out the DawgNation video channels, including YouTube, for the rest of the Jeremy Pruitt interview. For now, though, the guy that conducted the interview and does On the Beat each and every Monday night here on DawgNation and joins us each and every Wednesday, it's our buddy Mike Griffith. Let's get ready to talk to him right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So Mike Griffith joins us here now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Mike, we played a little audio there a moment ago from what Pruitt said with you on Monday about Georgia for next season. What'd you think of your chance to get an opportunity to speak with the former Tennessee head coach, former Georgia defensive coordinator? What'd you think about your chance to get a chance to speak with him on Monday?
Yeah, I like where Jeremy's at. He's been through a lot, obviously, since losing the job at Tennessee and the Giant staff turning over. And of course, I built a relationship with him. When I covered Tennessee, working for SEC Country, we staffed it. We were there when he got hired. We covered him down in the Sugar Bowl. I was down there to watch him as a defensive coordinator when when Alabama played Clemson, a really bad Clemson team, by the way, while Georgia was out there, going to the nth degree to beat Oklahoma. That was quite a disadvantage for the SEC champions, I might add. And then I was there at the national championship game to cover Jeremy and talked to him on the field after they won the game. He had been hired as the Tennessee head coach before those playoff games. So I built a good relationship with him and followed him around at all their caravan stops and got to know him pretty well. So I was pleased that he was a part of DawgNation. And, Jeremy's proud of his time at Georgia. That's an important time in his life. That's when him and his wife, Casey, got married. And, he felt like working for Mark Richt. He learned a lot. He felt like, having worked for Jimbo Fisher and Nick, it was kind of the same, he said. But when you work for Mark Richt, you kind of learn a lot about how Coach Bowden did things. And he said, between Bobby Bowden and Nick Saban, he feels like he learned a lot. And so he can speak really well about the Georgia program. Having been inside that building, he understands the inherent challenges that Georgia has, having been on the staff, and he understands how to recruit against Georgia, having been at Florida State and Alabama. So he's got a really interesting and unique perspective on all things Georgia, and, really comparable to Kirby. He's an interesting guy. And I thought he had a lot of really interesting things to say, but it was very clear to me that he's got a great appreciation for Georgia. He spoke very highly of Kirby and the Georgia football program.
Certainly an odd chapter of his life when he was here, though. All the rumors of the, some of the stuff that went on, some of it's, I guess, beyond rumors. So it's certainly, talk about, kind of an interesting football life he's led up until now. I'd say that Georgia tenure, some of the alleged confrontation with Rick and things like that, that's certainly an odd chapter in that football life, though, wouldn't you say?
For sure. And Jeremy he didn't say that specifically, but, what he did say was, when you're part of Nick Saban's staff and even Kirby Smart's staff, that, part of what makes it work is that guys do speak out. And from what, Kirby suggested about Jimbo and Nick when they were on the same staff, and even what Jimbo said to me at SEC meetings when I asked Jimbo Fisher about his relationship with Nick, and, because I had a former player tell me those guys were nose to nose on the practice field. And the way he explained it, he said, it's like your brother. And Brandon, you could probably relate to that.
Sure.
Do you love your brother? Well, yeah. Do you ever fight with your brother? Well, yeah. But at the end of the day, your fan. And I think what it sounds like to me, my takeaway on that is that on these Saban, Kirby, Jimbo staff, that sometimes, these coaches kind of have it out. That's part. I've been in newsrooms like that. Newsrooms where people say, "What do you think of the headline?" Well, I think it sucks. Okay, well then I'll change it, but then I've been in other newsrooms where, what do I think of the headline? Well, I think it sucks. Well, I can't believe you said that. I'm going to the Super Bowl. So it's just a matter of how is the staff managed, and it sounds like, Coach Richt being, he's a very gentle man, and then there's a lot of, hand holding and kumbaya, and maybe having a guy like Jeremy Pruitt thrown in that mix was not what Mark Richt's staffs were like compared to the more confrontational nature that you might find on a Nick, Jimbo, or Kirby staff.
One of the things that he talked about, I'm talking about Jeremy Pruitt here in the clip we played a moment ago, is Georgia coming back after having won a national championship, and a big indicator of kind of what the playing profile personality of the team is going to be was this Walter Camp preseason All-American list that came out a few days ago. And I wasn't surprised to see 3 Georgia names on that first team list. Those are the 3 names I guess you'd probably expect. Brock Bowers at tight end, Jalen Carter, Keely Ringo off the defense. But, Mike, it does once again remind me of something we've been saying here quite a bit, which is that for everything that Georgia lost, and obviously the challenge of repeating as national champion, that in terms of the way we typically measure a team's health moving into a new year, how many expected top-end performers do you have? How do you compare to other teams in that regard? That regardless of what happened a year ago, looking at just this 2022 team in isolation, Georgia would seem to be in pretty good shape to begin a season here. And this All-American list that came out the other day, acknowledging Bowers, acknowledging Ringo, acknowledging Carter, I think it's just the latest example of that. What do you think?
Well, I heard you use a poker analogy a little bit earlier in the show, so I'm going to give you a poker analogy.
Okay.
So you're holding a pair of queens when the flop happens, and you feel pretty good when another queen gets turned up, but there's two other guys going all in. You know, somebody might have a straight or somebody might have a flush. And here's where I'm going with that. I think Georgia's fine, but I think the other teams are better this year than they were a year ago. I think that South Carolina is markedly better and has a puncher's chance. Don't think they'll beat Georgia, but I think they're much better with the transfers they have in. They've got questions. I think Tennessee's better in year 2 under Heupel with Hendon Hooker now in his second year. I think Kentucky is better. You know, I don't know that I think the Oregon game is more of a threat than Clemson. I don't think Oregon is as good as Clemson was a year ago. But I guess my point is, I think Georgia, you know, the Alabama team they played last year wasn't the Alabama team of 2020. I don't know if they would have beaten the Alabama team of 2020. I don't know if they'd have beaten the LSU team of 2019. I don't know if they'd have beaten the Clemson team of 2018. And so my point is this. It's all relative. Georgia may be better than they were a year ago offensively and close on defense, and that may not be enough because a big part of the equation is what do the other teams look like? Who's injured? Who's not injured? Same thing for Georgia. Who's injured? Does Stetson stay healthy this year? Right? Remember 2020 he got injured. You know, you've got to go back to 2019 to find a year when Georgia ended the season with the same quarterback that started the season. Yeah. So there's a lot of elements to this. But as far as where they sit, I think if you're a Georgia fan, I think you should feel good about it. I think I think you're absolutely right. If Georgia makes the playoff, and without a doubt, you got to call that regardless of what happens. If they're in the playoff, that absolutely has to be considered. But to me, if they play in a New Year's Six game, to me, that's the break-even point. That's where I think Georgia should be, is in a New Year's Six game. And if they make the playoff, to me, I'm with you. I think that's a successful season.
Yeah, so it's interesting because to me, I think those outcomes are wildly different. And listen, I'm actually one of those people that says I kind of enjoy going to the New Year's Six bowls. I think going to the Sugar Bowl is actually pretty fun. I mean, there's certainly worse way to spend New Year's Eve than having some good food and enjoying, you know, a trip to poker trip to Harris Casino or something like that. There's certainly worse way to spend, you know, New Year's than that. But to me, I don't think a New Year's Six bowl is a success. If Georgia's playing the Sugar Bowl, which is, by the way, noon on New Year's Eve this year, which is a pretty strange thing. If it's New Year's Six bowl, speaking as a fan here for a moment, but also as someone who kind of evaluates this stuff for a living, I think that's below the standard of what Georgia ought to be aspiring to right now. You know, I think playoff is a success. In other words, if Georgia goes blah, blah, blah and makes the playoff and falls short of winning the national championship, would I be willing to call that a successful season? Yeah, I guess I probably would, knowing there's going to be plenty more national championships to compete for in the future. Being back in that Final Four to me would be a pretty big deal. But if all it is New Year's Six bowl, knowing that, you know, most of the SEC teams that are in that seemingly just sort of buy their way into that scenario, you know, I don't know that I feel that the New Year's Six game alone is much of an accomplishment. That would feel a little hollow for me, not just following up a national championship, but for just what Georgia's supposed to be under Kirby Smart. You know, New Year's Six alone feels a little less than what UGA ought to be capable of.
Well, I can understand that point of view going into the season because right now, you know, it's like the Daytona 500, right? Right now, every car thinks they're capable of winning. You know, everybody starts even and everybody's optimistic, you know, but I don't think the reason why I say that the New Year's Six is the break even is because all things being equal, if Georgia has attrition, it'll be more costly than last year because they don't have the championship depth, because this is a reload year, because you did lose 15 guys to the NFL and 4 former starters in the transfer portal and 11 guys and 7 guys because of the circumstance. I'm not saying that this is where Georgia should be every year. There's absolutely, because I think football's cyclical, right? I think, you know, like I think last year for Alabama, having lost 6 first-round picks, that's a huge success that they even made the playoff after losing 6 guys in the first round of the NFL draft and having a new quarterback and losing it. And the other thing, BA, is that sometimes what happens during the season kind of changes our perspective and our expectation, right? 2018 Georgia, you know, they had lost some pretty key guys, Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and Roquan Smith. And And, we thought, they should have been in the play. I thought they should have been in the playoff. I thought they were one of the 4 best teams, if that's what it is, but apparently it's not. I thought they belonged. So when they played Texas, I thought they needed to beat Texas because I thought they should, and then they didn't, and it felt like a disappointment. 1 year later, the 2019 team, which if you recall, I made some circus references that you didn't feel good about at the receiver position. I won't use that word today, but it felt like a huge win that they went to the Sugar Bowl and beat Baylor with all these guys missing and with, Jake dealing with a very different receiving core than a year before. So it's interesting how our perspective changes during the course of the season. As we sit here right now, if Georgia gets through the season, clean as a whistle with no injuries, I'm more apt to think that they probably will win all their regular season games or maybe only lose one, and likely make the playoff. But in the odds tell me that typically you're going to lose a few guys. And so I guess my point is this. I don't think Georgia has much of a margin for error this year if they're going to make the playoff because you have so much inexperience. And then behind that inexperience, you have some real green guys. So I just don't think the margin for error is there. And I don't want to set myself up or even the Georgia audience for anything that wouldn't be fair. That's kind of my thought.
So I'm guessing you're going to disagree with me on this, but I want to have the conversation anyway. Let's say that 2021 didn't happen. Let's say I waved a magic wand. That year just disappeared. That, we went straight from 2020 to 2022, the year we're about to go into. I believe that if you look at this Georgia team on paper right now, I say it is more of a legit championship contender on paper than any other Kirby Smart team was prior to the season beginning. I'm going to include 2017 on that there as well because there wasn't a lot of chatter about UGA prior to the 2017 season. I'll take the kind of on paper style buzz of this team more so than any other team in the Smart era. Now, by the way, there wasn't also a ton of national championship predictions for Georgia before last year either, but the fact they won the title just sort of clouds the discussion. So take 2021 out of this. I think this defense looks better on paper than the other defenses did to begin the season. I think the totality of the offense probably does there as well. Removing 2021 from the discussion, Mike, I believe this is the best team on paper to begin a season that Smart has had.
Wow. Well, so you're going chips all in on Stetson Bennett then, because I'm going to tell you, I think 2018 Jake Fromm was better because of the secondary and all the first round guys, Richie LeCount, Eric Stokes, Tyson Campbell. Jordan, they did have a pretty good front. They didn't have, I don't think Jordan was it, but you had Monty Rice in there. I'm going to go 2018. And I think your argument, for this boils down to whether or not people buy into that Stetson Bennett can elevate his game and score points when he needs to. I think that's what, and some people will say, well, sure he can, because a lot of the offense wasn't really needed. And Todd Monken told us that. He said, there were a lot of times in the second half, we turned it down, right? Texas is all gas and no brakes. Well, Kirby puts the brakes on in the fourth quarter. We've seen Dejon Edwards carry the ball 13 times in the fourth quarter of a game. We saw against Michigan, 16 plays and 15 of them were runs. So do we believe that if Georgia wanted to score more points and go all gas, more brakes, this offense could be prolific? I guess I think the jury's out. I think the jury's out. And we'll see, because in the SEC championship game and in the spring game, when they needed to rely heavily on his passing game, I didn't see it. Now, the other part of the discussion is the defense. And what will this young defense do? Jalen Carter is fantastic. I'm a believer in Zion Logue. I think he's big time. I think Nolan Smith is an NFL player. I think the linebacker play outside of Javon Dumas-Johnson, I think you got questions there. You got a couple questions at linebacker, and I got questions in the secondary. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid on the secondary. Every week we went to the interviews, and Chris Smith and Louis Sean told us, we got problems. We got problems. We got to go to the lab. You guys don't see it because our pass rush is so doggone good, but we are not as good on the back end as you think. And you lost your best cover guy, and you lost the first-round safety. So from a talent standpoint, and that's, I agree with you. But from what they've done on the field, I have questions. And I feel good about this offense, to be clear. I think that the running game is going to be, I think this is the best run game they've had since 2019. I think and Swift was awesome. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough of a passing game, that he could, have much room to work with. And that's why I say, BA, this all boils down to Stetson Bennett. Because if Bennett can get the ball downfield and be as efficient this year as he was last year, and game circumstances are going to be different. Field position is not going to be what it was. You're not going to get as many possessions, and sometimes you might play from behind. But if he can stay as efficient this year as he was last year, then you, my friend, will be right in that premise.
But if you want to compare Bennett to C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young and you take the other quarterback, I got no problem with that. But if the comparison with Jake Fromm, and I say this as a Fromm fan, Stetson Bennett's already better than Jake Fromm. Like what Bennett did last year was better than what Fromm did in 2018. He had a better year. Now, if you're going to say, well, I don't think he's going to come back and replicate that, that's obviously an opinion. We'll find out if that's true one way or another. But Bennett already has surpassed Jake Fromm's quarterback play in my mind, with a chance to, either add to that or whatever here in 2022. But Fromm in a Georgia uniform never had as good a year as Bennett had a year ago.
Well, that's true. JT Daniels and Stetson Bennett had the two highest passer ratings in Georgia football history. Both of them had higher passer ratings than JT in 2020 and Stetson higher than Aaron Murray. How much of that's Stetson Bennett and how much of that's Todd Monken? I think I think Jake Fromm's a better quarterback than Stetson Bennett. I think he's better. I think he throws better. I think he makes better decisions. His mobility wasn't as good. But I thought he was a better quarterback. I think if you put Jake Fromm in last year's team, they don't lose a game all year. We can't play that imaginary game. But to your point, and I'll agree, and I'll say it again, if Stetson Bennett can be as efficient and put similar numbers up from a passing standpoint, touchdown to interception ratio, passing efficiency, if all those numbers can be that good. But my question is, how much of Stetson Bennett's success was a byproduct of having a defense that was holding teams to 6.9 points per game during the regular season and favorable field position with a guy that I don't think we talk often enough. And JT, by the way, JT Daniels too. I mean, JT Daniels isn't beating Clemson without a championship defense. Clemson's defense put the clamps on. JT Daniels isn't coming from behind against Cincinnati if the defense doesn't shut Cincinnati down in the fourth quarter after Georgia's down 21-10. So I say the same thing about JT. JT benefited from that defense every bit as much. Any quarterback would. That's not a knock on Stetson Bennett that he had a championship defense. The question is, what happens to Stetson Bennett and the offense, Todd Monken for that matter, when you don't have a championship defense, when you don't have the luxury of playing ahead 90% of the time, when you're not starting out at your own 40-yard line? And if those numbers can stay efficient, even though those other circumstances will likely change because Jake Camarda is not coming back, then I agree with you. But to me, that's where the proof is in the pudding. And it'll be really, I felt really good about the 2018 team though, Brandon. I got to tell you, I mean, you look at that defense, man. Tyson Campbell, DeAndre Baker, Eric Stokes, Richie LeCount was an All-American before the injury. Those linebackers, that line wasn't what it was now, but it was still pretty good. Swift in that, I love Swift in the backfield. Thought so much of him. NFL receivers, I like Nod at tight end. The Great Wall offensive line. Man, that's a great discussion. It really is a great discussion point.
Well, we'll have to have it more in the time to come. Mike, thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Brady Pest Management today. We'll look forward to reading a lot more from you there at DawgNation.com, and we'll get a chance to chat with you very soon there as well.
Appreciate it, B.A. Thanks, man.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Some interesting stuff there with Mike Griffith. Interesting look at what Georgia's going to look like here this upcoming season. And obviously, no one can know the end result of the season. Listen, I come on here, I could make some sort of claim about how the year is going to end, but I would be correct about as frequently as chance would dictate, right? And there's about a coin flip of getting that right or not. But I do think that if you want to go back through kind of like the annals of history in your mind, especially if you follow this close, especially if you have a pretty good memory, frankly, after a while my memory starts to fade here a little bit. I just think it's important to know that this Georgia team feels like it's in the shadow of what Georgia did in 2021, but in terms of expected top-end performers, I mean, look at some of the mock draft stuff that's out there. I mean, Georgia's very commonly right now projected to have at least two. I shouldn't say at least two. That'd be enough. Like 2 top 10 picks in next year's draft. Listen, a year out, mock drafts notoriously incorrect. But, I mean, did the 2018 team have, and listen, I'm not obviously bashing Georgia in 2018 or anything like that. But in terms of, what was being said about a lot of these teams going into the year, how frequently did you see multiple guys being projected near the front end of the first round of an NFL draft, that if you're a Georgia fan, the kind of chatter that exists around your team right now is the kind of chatter, I think, that would lead you to believe you're in pretty good shape as you move to the upcoming season, and now you just got to go out there and just kind of do it all over again, obviously. And it's not easy to do when you've got new faces in new places, but Georgia's certainly going to have a chance to do that here as soon as this fall. Can't wait to see that play out. Before we get to that, though, there is more summer to enjoy, and for some of you, that means being on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I hear from some of you from time to time, "B, I got one coming up. I'm excited about it. I'm going to be on so-and-so ship or whatever else." And listen, I'm so happy that, A, you're enjoying the cruise vacation, and B, you're letting me know about your Royal Caribbean experience, because I love celebrating that with you, because there's really no better thing to do this time of year than being out there, whether it's one of those 3 or 4 night sailings heading towards the Bahamas, one of those 7 night sailings maybe on a ship. I was on, what was I on? Harmony of the Seas. I told you, the memory fails after a little while here. I was on Harmony of the Seas back in February. Gorgeous ship, great experience. One of those Oasis-class ships, largest cruise ships really in the world. And they provide so many great options and opportunities for you, including specialty restaurants. That's one of the things I think has been really cool about the Royal Caribbean cruise vacations in recent years, are all the great specialty restaurant options that have been added on board. Of course, you've got the Chops Grill on every one of the ships. That's the signature steakhouse that you think of when you think about Royal Caribbean. But you've also got Playmaker Sports Bar as well. And that's one of those great things where you can watch sports, you can have wings, you can have some nachos, you can enjoy some good beer, and do the same kind of stuff that you would do in kind of a land-based sports bar, but do it out there on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. You got Johnny Rockets, and you got just all kinds of cool things there as well. So check out our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. They can help you get settled on the right Royal Caribbean cruise vacation for you. It's tcava.com. That's the website, tcava.com. You can also give them a call, 770-952-8300. One more time on that number, 770-952-8300. All right, some recruiting flair to our cruising around the SEC here, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, starting with 5-star edge rusher Jaden Wayne, who's going to have a new home for his senior year. He let us know on social media here this week that he is heading from the state of Washington to IMG Academy. Now, Wayne has been a recruit of note for Georgia fans here for quite some time. And by the way, you see that on Twitter there. Exciting to announce that I'll be attending IMG Academy for my senior year. He thanks all the folks involved there, including Ascenders. I think it's kind of a cool name for IMG Academy. But he's heading to IMG Academy. Wayne's been a name of note for UGA because seemingly that's who just Georgia's involved with right now, the best edge rusher types in the country. And that's obviously kind of what Wayne is. And that's not the only sort of 5-star edge type guy that Georgia's going after here. Samuel Mpemba's a name you've heard us talk about before. We'll continue to talk about. But Wayne's a guy that a lot of Georgia fans like. And obviously, Georgia throughout the years has had some very, very notable success recruiting guys from IMG Academy. So, listen, a lot of us aren't the smartest people in the world, but it's pretty easy to connect the dots on this. Here's a name of note for UGA. Lives way out there in the state of Washington. We've been told it's going to be hard to pull him so far from home. All of a sudden, he's not playing high school football so far from home anymore. All of a sudden, he's playing in a school down in Florida, in Bradenton, that Georgia's had a lot of success. Think about Warren Brinson, think about other big names who've kind of come to UGA from IMG. So this must, the thought process would go, make things a little easier for UGA. I'm assuming it doesn't hurt here. I'm assuming that it doesn't make Georgia's chances any worse. However, and I don't think we have this photo to show you, but like the one thing I keep coming back to is, do you remember when Wayne was taking his official visit to Georgia? He had a lot of family members with him there. And like in some of the photos they were posing for, he was holding up the state of Washington flag in those photos. And I just remember thinking that's a lot of like state pride for a guy like this on a Georgia visit. That's not the kind of thing you see everybody always doing. Like, in other words, like when Keely Ringo was visiting UGA coming from Arizona, he was holding the snake in that one picture. I guess it was a Gantz snake, but he wasn't, holding up the Arizona State flag necessarily. Wayne seems to have a little bit of geographic tie to that Pacific Northwest area, that Pacific time zone, if nothing else. In other words, when a cycle ago when Bear Alexander left the state of Texas to come to IMG Academy, my understanding of that situation is that essentially ended really much connection he had to the state of Texas whatsoever. And Texas A&M holding on to that commitment once he was out of the state of Texas became a very hard thing to do. I don't know that I would necessarily compare the Alexander situation to the Wayne situation given their ties to the states they previously lived in before moving to IMG. Now, that's also kind of based on sort of a drive-by account of the situation, sort of a 10,000-foot view look on it all. But I don't know that I would say that Wayne going to IMG Academy is necessarily the same thing as Bear Alexander doing that a year ago. But I'm sure that Jeff Sintel will talk more about this tonight on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. And obviously we'll have Jeff here on the show on Friday heading into the 4th of July weekend. And we'll ask him about Wayne specifically, whether him leaving a state long way from here, moving to IMG Academy a lot closer, but also a program where really Georgia's kind of dominated from a recruiting standpoint, if that makes it more of a attainable goal for Georgia winning the recruitment for a guy like Jaden Wayne. Or maybe you make a comparison, you say, well, Georgia's pursuit's actually a little bit heavier for a guy like Mapemba or something like that. We'll let just Jeff tell us the whole deal on that when he joins us later on this week. Also thought it was interesting to see Georgia in the mix here for another good-looking defensive back. This one, Daniel Harris, out of the South Florida kind of Miami area. Harris putting it out there that he's going to be committing coming up, Friday? July 1st is Friday. And so he's got a top four that includes Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, and Georgia. And I'm laughing here because if you're not watching a video, so you got like Michigan down here at the bottom. You got, Ohio State and Penn State kind of sort of straddling, both sides here. But right in the middle, you got Harris, center, in the center, wearing the Georgia all-white uniform, standing tall there, got the chain around his neck. It's easy to look at this edit and say, ooh, he maybe feels a little bit differently about one school than he feels about the rest. But here's the thing I'm going to say about this. And if you're not watching on a video, I apologize. Maybe I'll share a link with this. So Penn State's worn all white for as long as anybody can remember. Ohio State has worn the sort of white and silver road look for a long time. I got to say, and maybe Connor Riley producing today, maybe you agree with me on this, the Georgia all white, new as it is, it pops a lot more than that Penn State white does, doesn't it? Pops a lot more than that Ohio State white does with the crimson. Now, I don't think that Georgia's going to be wearing this white uniform anytime soon, but it's been very popular with the recruits. And you see it there, for those of you watching on video, alongside some of these other, more famous white uniforms, especially Penn State, well-known, long-time white uniform. The Georgia with the kind of cool extra stripe on the helmet and the nice, red with the G around the collar, that pops a lot more than those of Big Ten uniforms do. But also Harris, who a lot of folks like coming out of South Florida, with Georgia kind of right there in the center of his edit as he announced the July 1st commitment date. So there you go on that. And then finally, one story to get to for our cruise around the SEC. Actually doesn't involve the SEC, but it's maybe a precursor for the SEC. And speaking of Connor Riley, he popped on our RS Andrews cooldown yesterday to mention this. The ACC's moving to what they're calling a 3-5-5 model here for scheduling going forward. They're going to have 3 permanent opponents and 5 rotational opponents on their future schedule. And, this is obviously, I would say, where the way the SEC is going to. There is some debate about whether the SEC will adopt the 8 or the 9-game version of this. At one point in time, I guess it was thought, well, if you go to 8 games, you can only have 1 permanent opponent for whatever reason, that if you want the 3 permanent opponents, you needed the 9-game conference schedule. So we're still listening to some debate about that. There has been reporting out of Kentucky, for instance, that the Wildcats are a program that's against the 9-game schedule. They've said, well, if the league goes to a 9-game schedule, Kentucky won't be able to play Louisville every year anymore because I guess they've got, Eastern Kentucky and teams like that they want to keep playing, which is disgraceful, but nonetheless, that's kind of the chatter there. It's also kind of interesting to see not only about how much the SEC's future move resembles what the ACC is doing right now, But you are just really reminded of just how different a lot of leagues are. And the ACC, from a geographic standpoint, is certainly the closest league to the SEC. But in terms of how actually business gets done, the two leagues could not feel any farther away. That when you talk about SEC and permanent opponents, it's really all about preserving rivalries or the kind of cool games that make for big matchups. In the ACC, the best that I could tell, and I tried to follow some of the chatter related to this yesterday, the entire discussion is kind of related around like who is even a draw to begin with and how many teams. It's almost like, as opposed to the SEC, where some teams are going to draw 3 permanent opponents that make for a very tough schedule, and that's kind of the paramount part of the discussion. In the ACC, you get the impression that some teams don't care how tough the opponents are. They just want some teams that are willing to travel on the road, so it makes it a little bit easier to sell some of the tickets. For instance, at Georgia Tech here, there was a little bit of chatter yesterday related to the fact that, you know, they drew Wake Forest as a permanent opponent and not Florida State, who there's a little bit more of a geographic tie there. Over the years, Florida State and Georgia Tech have actually probably played more memorable football games than you might realize if you don't really care that much about Georgia Tech. And so some Tech fans and maybe even some Florida State fans like the idea of Tech and Florida State playing every year because there's a pretty big alumni base for the Seminoles in Atlanta. And yet instead, Tech got Wake Forest instead of Florida State, an easier opponent in most years, you might think, but kind of worse for the turnstiles, worse for your bottom line at the box office. And in the ACC right now, that sort of seems to matter more than the other stuff. Just really amazing how different that league is from this one, even though in a lot of cases you have a team in that league that shares a state with an SEC, brethren. But boy, the two conferences could not be more different right now. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I also want to mention this, and I meant to mention this the other day. So I'm in the midst right now, by the way, this is DawgNation Daily presented by Breda Pest Management, but I'm in the midst right now of filling out my ballot for the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. I'm very, very proud to be on the committee for the High School Football Hall of Fame. It's the first ever Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. The first ever induction class is coming up this fall. And the first class is going to have 36 members. And I've got to turn my first ballot in here coming up pretty soon. My guess is we'll probably end up having some tiebreaker votes and some things like that. And I'm not going to make my full ballot public, I don't think. Maybe eventually I will. I'm certainly not doing that right now. Connor says don't make the ballot public. Is that bad form? Or, do make the ballot public. All right, so Connor says I do need to make the ballot public. Well, eventually I might. I'm not going to do that today, but eventually I might make the full ballot public. Here's one of the things I am trying to do, though. Like, I am not a historian. I'm not smart enough to be a historian, but I am an appreciator of history. And some of the most fun stuff related to what I've been doing, kind of going through the process of making my, initial selections for induction into the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame, is going back to like the early days of Georgia high school football. And it is just really fascinating to kind of go back and think about not just, the state, the sport in this state in its infancy, but back before football was even nearly as big a deal around the country as it is now, early 1900s, things like that. Kind of cool to think about some of the guys who sort of brought the sport to the forefront in the state. There's also a very sad chapter related to all of this, the segregation that obviously occurred at one point in time, and so many great football stars who simply didn't get the glory they were due. And I think one of the special things about our Hall of Fame, it's a chance to, I don't want to say completely right that wrong, because you can't go back to the past and fix that necessarily, but you can honor here what should have been honored long before. And I take that part of my job really seriously. And I'm trying to dig deep into some of that and learn more about some of the guys, that didn't play in what we would think of as the GHSA and didn't get to play in kind of an integrated version of the sport. Who needs to be honored because of that? Baseball's kind of gone through some of the same process with stuff like that. And we're clearly doing that with the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. And frankly, I take that pretty seriously. But the other thing that I've been kind of doing here, and I'll get ready to wrap this up, but the other thing that I've been, kind of doing here related to all of this is I have learned a lot about some former Georgia guys throughout all this, former UGA players. And I don't know, it's been really cool to see. Like for instance, like Buck Bellew is a guy that I've known for a long time. And obviously, Buck has a great sort of, piece of our mind share because he helped lead Georgia to a national championship in 1980. But y'all, do you know how good Buck Bellew was in high school? Like, that's one of the cool things that I've actually gone back to learn in sort of preparing to make this vote. of just how phenomenal his stats were as a great multi-sport athlete there at Valdosta High School in the 70s. It's, really before I was born. But it's phenomenal to go back and look at what he did as a high school player. Now, I'm not saying for sure he's going to be on my final ballot. Frankly, I've got 50-something people on my final ballot right now. I've got to cut it basically in half to be able to submit it. But that's a high school stat line that was way more prolific than I maybe thought it was expected to be. Andy Johnson, another guy like that, and this really is before my time, but Andy Johnson was a very good quarterback at Georgia. He played at the old Athens High School back when that was still a thing. That's a former Georgia quarterback, a huge career there in Athens. And I didn't, really know this. It's been really fun to kind of go back and look at some of this kind of stuff. I can't wait. I guess eventually I probably will share my whole ballot, and eventually we'll share the entire induction class. But I'm in the process of kind of going through all this right now, and I just wanted to mention just how much fun it is to make some of those selections. I'm sure I'll get some of it wrong, and I'm sure those who are following this closely will have some great arguments about who should be getting in that may not be getting in. But I am taking the process very seriously. I want a great class. I want my ballot on this to look like the history of the state in an appropriate way. And so it's a cool thing right now. My first ballot is due going into the weekend, so I'll give you more updates on that as we kind of get there. And of course, doing stuff like that in the summer, sitting around by the pool, maybe reading some of these old bios and all that kind of stuff, makes me also happy to have a nice, good cooler of ice cold Finnish long drink with me as I do, because when I'm outside at the pool or going fishing or playing golf or whatever else that you might be doing this time of year, the Finnish long drink just goes great with it. And actually, this is a true story. So went to the lake on Saturday, and one of my neighbors who we went up there with was like, BA, you got any Finnish long drink? She didn't call me BA, but I guess everybody else does. She goes, you bring in that Finnish long drink with it? We need some more of that cranberry. She loves the Finnish long drink cranberry, and a lot of folks do there as well. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail, comes right there in a can. It's got the gin kick, so this is a good mixed drink for those of you who like that this time of year. And you can get, grapefruit flavor, or you want the cranberry flavor. You get different kind of varieties there as well. It comes from Finland back in the 1950s. That's why it's called the Finnish long drink, back when the summer games were in Helsinki. It's been in America now for a few years, and it's in Georgia now. And you can pretty much get some wherever you might be going. Pools, beverage stores, golf courses, all kinds of places. A great way to enjoy yourself here this time of year. So go to thelongdrink.com. You can find out more about that, where you can pick up some Finnish long drink today. How did this show turn to be so long? I feel like it's the middle of summer. We're well over an hour. I don't quite know how this one turned into such a marathon, but here we are. Nonetheless, we'd like to close out our show by giving you a golden shoe. We didn't do this yesterday. One of these days we didn't do this because I've had a little bit of a issue with my Photoshop, but I got a great one to give for you today. Obviously, Florida, been struggling in recruiting. Our buddy Mad Dog reaches out and saying that Gator season ticket holders are going to be getting an autographed photo of Billy Napier in the mail as an appreciation for their continued support to go along with the open letters and things like that he's writing. This is really funny. It's a Gator envelope. You get the autograph from Billy Napier, but the photo is Billy Bob Thornton from Sling Blade. That's the nickname that some Georgia fans have given to Napier because of his resemblance. Good stuff from Mad Dog. This is one of his better ones. This is very funny. Mad Dog's a very talented dude. Speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, how about 4,920 days since they have won a national championship? Boy, that's a long time. And Gator Hater Countdown back in Jacksonville. 122 days from right now, strutting in as the national champions and getting themselves another win. Fun to think about that. This is DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will see you again tomorrow and on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Connor Riley, good enough to join us.
One, you have to release your ballot for transparency's sake. We need to know who you leave in and who you leave out.
Sure.
That's my big thing with all Hall of Fame ballots.
Yeah.
Two, I do have a little bit of a bone to pick with this High School Football Hall of Fame because it does not include players from the 2010s. And while I understand later on in the and like 2018, 2019, it's hard to contextualize them. But I personally, as someone who played in that era, I used played loosely there. I don't see how you have a Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame specifically without Robert Kimdichie and Deshaun Watson.
I think that's fair. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I think that it's very hard to do a Hall of Fame inaugural class, right? Because in addition to the 36 people we're voting on, we're also kind of giving a free pass to guys who are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So the class, if you're a Georgian in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, you're kind of getting a little bit of a free pass on this too. So the class is going to be very big initially because you've got like more than a century's worth of history to consider. And I think here's the thing that I think smart people are doing right on. You're right. The guys like Deshaun Watson, Kim Dichie definitely need to be in the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. But two things. First of all, the College Football Hall of Fame has all kinds of people that still haven't gotten in yet that need to be in. The second thing is this, is that if you put in contemporary names, like I saw Deshaun Watson play in high school. I saw, obviously, Kim Dichie play in high school. I think there's a natural bias to gravitate towards that, get super fixated on the stuff that we all remember. It's just not as easy to go back and look at the career of, like, say, Clint Castleberry for a moment, who went to Tech and, whatever, but he was a great high school player. I just think that if you want this high school football Hall of Fame to look like history, especially when some of this kind of stuff is the kind of thing there aren't a lot of records for. There's not a lot of kind of stuff like that. That I think that you have to put a little bit of a bias in favor of the, 20th century earlier stuff.
Older.
You got to skew older because those guys might not ever get in if you don't. There is no veterans committee here, right? Like, the only people voting are the people who are voting right now. And so I think that eventually it's going to get caught up, and the guys, like you said, the Kim Dichies and the Watsons and all those guys, will eventually have, their moment in the sun. May not be the world's greatest year to have Deshaun, chasing. But eventually a guy like that, certainly will get enshrined. But I actually think, even though this probably gets less clicks on the internet, I actually think, going back and looking at, like, say, 1950s and in some cases like 1920s, I think that's an important part of this, because to fully appreciate how good a Kim Dichie or a Watson were, I think that you have to have them alongside, like a guy like, McWhorter, who, people who were really like the first big name football players in the state. I think you have to be able to see the entirety of that. And to me, that's actually one of the most fun parts of the process.
Right. And to that point, I believe the youngest guy on the ballot is Hudson Mason, who I absolutely believe should be a Hall of Famer. He is actually, ironically, the only guy on the list that I had technically played against. He probably, to your point, I don't know if he should get in first ballot because, you mentioned Buck Bellew, Andy Johnson. There are so many other historically great quarterbacks, though, even though Mason has better numbers and was a statistical trailblazer in that sense. You want to honor the guys that came before him. That sort of allowed Mason to get to that point.
Who do you think the best 21st century Georgia high school football player is?
I go. Granted, it's because we were playing at the same time. For me, it'll be Kim Dichie. As a high school around that time, everyone in the state knew who he was. He was so good. His college and NFL career didn't pan out how people thought, but 21st century, Kim Dichie would be number one overall.
Would you think it's crazy if I said Eric Berry?
No, because and the same reason I sort of have Kim Dichie anymore, and everyone knows him for, I think he had multiple 20-sack seasons, but he was also playing running back for those Grayson teams, and that 2011 Grayson team that won a state title is up there with the great all-time teams. Another guy I'd maybe throw out there, Alvin Kamara's senior year at Norcross was insane.
That's good.
I don't want to say single-handedly carried because he had, talented other players on that team, but he was so good for that team as well. Those are the two names that I think really pop out. You could say Deshaun Watson as well.
Watson was really good.
Was really good for Gainesville High School up there in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, and listen, Deshaun's still a huge figure up there in Gainesville. And listen, it's hard to argue against Kim Dichie for the reasons that you mentioned, but I just remember at the time that Barry was playing, some of the stuff that I was hearing about him was just so, like people were so like profuse in their praise of him that when I think of like truly great players this century, Barry is definitely one of those names that comes up.
And I would say, it's harder to put a quarterback up there just because guys like Barry, guys like Kim Dichie can play two ways. Like, the stuff Trevor Lawrence did at Cartersville is rather insane. I think he lost like 3 games in a 4-year starting career there. Truly a transcendent career there for Lawrence.
Blessed Trinity beating Lawrence in the playoffs.
One of the most stunning upsets.
And by the way, JT Bertrand, guys, he's going to have a great career. And, but that's one of the great wins for any team individually in the state in probably a long time.
Yep.
That's really fun stuff. Really fun stuff. All right, we'll get some comments here, and glad to have all of you with us here today. Let me go to YouTube first, I guess. No telling what they're arguing about. They're probably mad at me for talking about high school football for so long. But nonetheless, we'll have a good time here and see how folks are doing. Spencer Clark says Carter's a Falcon. Yeah, Lorenzo Carter. I'm actually really excited about having him for the Falcons. And, I think that some of Carter in Atlanta gets obscured. Like Falcons, Georgia fans are so mad at the Falcons for not drafting Nakobe Dean. Like it's amazing how palpable that anger was, in the aftermath of the draft. And like I don't think I quite realized just how intense it was because I don't know, I guess, we had been on a cruise that week. I think that's probably part of it. I was, just in a good mood from having been in the Bahamas. But a lot of Georgia fans, they were showing teeth over Falcons passing on Dean. It actually obscures the fact that, a Norcross product like Lorenzo, beloved Bulldog here in Atlanta. I think Lorenzo actually threw out the first pitch for the Braves the other day. By the way, different topic for a different day. But what is going on with Freddie Freeman? My gosh. That's quite a scene around Freeman right now. But the point is that Carter being in Atlanta ought to be kind of a feel-good story. And, I hope he has a good year. A lot of Georgia fans obviously love Lorenzo with good reason. Also cool to have a Metro Atlanta high school product back on the team there, too. Hopefully, eventually, that gets the attention it probably deserves. Jay Shipe says, stop slandering the A&M trophy case or your NIL cruise money is going to dry up. That's funny. I am open for all NIL contributions anyone wants to make to me. Memphis Dog says, is Mike Moonpie Wilson on your ballot? So he is not among the initial, so there was a lot of debate about the 100 names because there are 100 names being considered for the Hall of Fame. And at one point in time, there was a call that went out to those of us on the committee of, is there anybody not on the 100 names that should be on them? And I didn't speak up. If I did speak up to add somebody, Mike Moonpie Wilson would have been the name I would have suggested that makes the 100. Now, does that mean he makes the Hall of Fame? I don't know. But the one name that's not on the 100 that I do think should have been there is Mike Moonpie Wilson. I didn't speak up on this for two reasons. A lot of the people who are making this list are so much smarter than me that I'd be embarrassed to even, speak up on any of this kind of stuff. And B, Moonpie is from my alma mater, and Memphis Dog kind of knows that. Moonpie is from my alma mater, Johnson High School, and it sort of seems like, home cooking a little bit. But if I had suggested anybody for the Hall of Fame that didn't make the 100 nominees, Moonpie, who was himself a former Dog from my hometown of Gainesville, played at my high school before I was born. If there had been anybody that I would have added for consideration, Moonpie would have been that guy. Let's see what else. Antoine Simpson says Freeman fired his agent. I feel like we say this a lot in sports these days. I don't quite remember ever seeing something quite like what's gone on with Freeman. And I don't think it makes him look great, although I certainly am glad that he has, positive memories of time in Atlanta. I also think that I'm a little bit different than a lot of Braves fans who are they're sort of very anti, in the eyes of Braves fans, at least a lot of the Braves fans I hear from, is that they believe that Freeman's agent is in the wrong here, and Freeman's in the wrong here for not standing up and directing his representation to do what he wanted them to do. And I get where that comes from. That's probably the right viewpoint. I guess I still don't quite know if the Braves had to draw such a hard line in the sand. Maybe they did. They don't get Matt Olson if they don't. But it's I'm not quite so sure I want to pat the Braves organization on the back for being this cutthroat with their clear leader and, one of the main, major contributors to last season, allowing them to get to the point where they could bring in players that led them to a World Series. I'm not quite so sure, this degree of hardball with Freeman was necessarily required. Maybe it was. I don't know. I guess I just sort of have weird mixed feelings about this that's different than a lot of Braves fans seem to. Jonathan Aaron says, you have to put WWE Hall of Famer Ron Simmons on the Georgia High School Hall of Fame. So right now I do, and this is another one where it's probably going to be, people are going to say, to the extent that people care, I'm afraid that people are going to go through my ballot like, well, it's obvious that BA voted for this guy. But yeah, I do very much have, right, because I have my bios in front of me here. I do very much have Ron Simmons. I have Ron Simmons' name circled right now as a guy that I think could be in. Really, I do. I think Ron Simmons, those who realize, was a really good football player. And here's the one thing I did not know. This is an example of having an appreciation for history, but not quite always, being a true historian. I didn't realize that Ron Simmons and James Brooks played on the same Warner Robins team. I guess I should have. I don't know. For those of you who don't know, that James Brooks went on to play for the Bengals as a running back. He played at Auburn. He was, I'm talking about just a stat machine. This was a calculator, carrying the football for the Demons. He and Ron Simmons on the same team together. You want to give me some grainy YouTube footage of Simmons on defense, the future WCW world champion? James Brooks on that offense. That's pretty fun right there. That's pretty fun. But yes, I am strongly considering Ron Simmons for the Hall of Fame. If for no other reason than I'd love to just meet him at the induction ceremony. Robert Barnes says I didn't know this. Robert Barnes played for Warner Robins. That's quite a team to say he played for, program to say he played for. He says Valdosta beat us soundly. At that time, when you made the playoffs, you had to play Valdosta at their home field. Yeah, that's tricky, but Warner Robins, quite a program, and still very good here right now. Obviously, very good player from the Demons, Vic Burley, just committed to Clemson, so they've still got some elite talent there for sure. Caleb Meyer says, I know it's not Georgia, but Derrick Henry stats are the craziest I've ever seen. Yeah, I can only imagine what it must have been like. Obviously that was a player that Georgia was pretty heavily involved with in recruiting for a while. But when you first see Henry kind of emerge down there in Yulee, Florida, that had to be like, wait, is this two people or one person? Because he's just so big. To this day, of all the guys in the NFL, Henry is still one of the guys that if I had the chance to watch highlights or, just flipping red zone or something like that, a Titans game where Derrick Henry's carrying the football, to this day, he is still about the most fun player in the NFL for me to watch on just a regular basis, just because he's so much bigger than everybody else. It's fun. My son also has this thing. He's 10, so Derrick Henry's always given the stiff arms, and so my son will run around the house and he wants to do a Derrick Henry style stiff arm. And sometimes if I'm not paying attention, he'll come up to me and he'll just stiff arm me. And one day he got me under the chin. It made me so mad. Oh my gosh, just to be stiff armed out of nowhere like that. I guess I got to appreciate the fact that he likes the sport, but I could have done without being stiff armed when I wasn't paying attention. Let's see what else. And by the way, some folks in here talking about Valdosta there as well. Another guy that just absolutely is going to get major consideration, and I think he'll probably make it, although I don't want to say it too soon, is Jay Rome's father, Stan Rome. That was a really good player, two-sport star there as well. Very, very good player. Ron Watson says Quincy Carter's the best football player I've seen. That Southwest team had 21 players sign college. That's a good example. There's a lot of Southwest DeKalb representation on this list. And I remember Quincy. Quincy was also a good baseball player back during that time too. I saw him play baseball a couple of times. Randy Hall says Florida's going to have, this is at DawgNation.com, going to have the best manicured field in the SEC due to Billy Sling Blade Napier. That's really funny. Cat Story says, I read an article this morning where Chipper Jones warned Freddie Freeman not to do this. Freddie made this choice, and I don't think he's happy in L.A. Different type of fan. Yeah, I think all that's true, and it's well documented what Chipper did say, warning him there. Hemingway says, was asked earlier, where can we get a DawgNation polo shirt like the one you're wearing? First of all, this is old school DawgNation here. This is the original DawgNation polo. This was the very first ones, circa 2015. As far as we used to have some of that kind of stuff. That is not really a business that we're in anymore. I'd love to tell you maybe one day we would be. Odds are we probably won't for a handful of reasons. But I'm glad. I appreciate you wanting one. And we used to kind of do some of that kind of stuff. That is not what we're doing right now, though, for a good number of reasons. Matt Rugavina says, at the end of the day, Freddie's a cautionary tale. Sometimes the business decision isn't the best decision. That's true. That's true. And I mean, I think there are a lot of people who've kind of crunched the numbers on this, and they're not even quite so sure this ended up working out for him from a business standpoint there, too. Here's when you factor in, okay, you got the extra year, but, California income tax, things like that. When you start factoring in all these numbers, is it really even that much more money to go to a place that he probably did not want to be? Here's the other thing I think is true there as well. And I think about this sometimes with like college football players in NIL. It's like, if you're making a decision solely on the basis of a few $100,000 worth of NIL, that money's not going to last you for the rest of your life. And if you're giving a huge portion of that to somebody else, and by the way, you understand why guys want to help their family, things like that, or just be nice to their family, even if they don't quite need the help. But if you're giving some of that money away, it's really not going to last your entire life. But, $500,000, which is a lot of money, like within a few years, that $500,000 is gone. Now, maybe it's gone towards an asset that you're going to have the rest of your life, or maybe it's gone towards, I don't know what, but it's not going to be here forever. And if you invest it, it's going to be, a little supplemental income, but it's not enough to live on for the rest of your life for the most part. So just be really careful making a big life choice on the basis of an amount of money that's not going to be with you forever. I've said before, if you were willing to give me $2 million, let's say it's my son, if you were willing to give him $2 million, I would probably go to a school on the basis of NIL alone, because you could invest that money after taxes, what you have a chance to hold on to. You could invest that money and have, a sensible income for the rest of your life. You're not going to be the richest guy in the world, of course, but you're going to have a sensible income for the rest of your life on the basis of that $2 million. Any amount smaller than that's likely not to last as long as you will. You're going to run out of money before you run out of life. So just be careful making that choice. Keith Finney says, imagine me getting stiff-armed by my son and then steamrolled. Like some of those things were like, it made me so mad because it's like anytime you kind of take it right here or like under the nose, it just really hurts. And even if you're a small kid, still you pop somebody in the face, that hurts. That hurts. So yeah, like it's like sometimes if I see him coming, I'll sort of like be on guard to sort of like, brace. But if I don't see him coming, he does that thing like that. It makes me really mad. That makes me really mad. For sure. But, it's all in good fun. All right. Let's go to Facebook for a moment. And we got to get ready to wrap up after this because it's getting late. All right. On Facebook, Matt Rugavina says, I just hope these players get good advices on taxes and stuff like that. Yeah, I do too. I do. I mean, I think a lot of these guys are adding layers of representation that I'm not quite so sure they need. It's like if you're a 5-star recruit, Georgia knows how to find you. And yeah, you can't use NILs and inducement, stuff like that. But the point is, the idea that you need some sort of like representative to be the recipient of your NIL solicitations, trust me, that's not true. That's not true. These big schools know how to get in touch with you. And if somebody wants to give you money, they're going to find a way to do that. Ryan Walker says, is Walt Frazier from Georgia? The former Nick? I didn't know that. That's really cool. I didn't know that. That's really cool. The great former Nick. By the way, the last Knicks team to have won a championship, by the way, too. Don't forget that. John Foster says, hey, don't worry, Freddie. We got the Braves. Why do we want them? This is what the agent was saying. Next day, Braves trade for Matt Olson. I'd love to hear Freddie's call to his agent when he heard that news. Yeah, I mean, I remember at the time, I sort of got the sense that he was just really downtrodden. I mean, just really, just very, very, very sad about it. And then you saw the results here this weekend. This weekend in Atlanta was one of the most bizarre series I can remember. I mean, the whole Freeman thing, of course, the Braves ended up losing 2 of 3, and Freeman was a pretty big factor in the game on Sunday night. But what a strange week. What a strange weekend it was. Gerald Herman says it didn't hurt as bad when Charlie bit his finger. Yeah. I think, didn't I hear did they take that video off YouTube and turn it in NIL? I mean, not NIL, but what do you call those things? What's wrong with me? What are those things called? NFT. Did they turn the finger bite into an NFT, I heard, and took it off YouTube? Y'all remember NFTs? Yeah, that's kind of funny. Ken Holcomb says, offensively, Herschel Walker. Defensively, David Pollock are my best Georgia high school players of all time. Honorable mention goes to Eddie Meat Cleaver Weaver from West Rome. Well, there's nobody who had a better nickname than the Meat Cleaver. Great nickname, and good stuff there too. Sandy Price says Thomas Davis is a no-brainer, just like Benjamin Watson. He also says, will you mail me the shirt you have on today? I'm going to keep this one for right now, but maybe one of these days. But Sandy, I'm glad that you like it. Thank you. Robert A. Smith says, get your kids some golf clubs and sign them up with the Live, which is obviously the new tour, Saudi-backed tour, and they have an event coming up this weekend in Portland. I've always said this about golf, which is I think pushing your kids towards golf is a really good idea, potentially for a lot of reasons. But here's the thing I love about golf from a dad with kids standpoint. It's like and some of you know this, you got boy in baseball, you got girl in softball, you got, basketball. Let me tell you what all these sports have in common. When it gets nighttime, what do? You flip on the lights and you keep playing. Some of y'all have done summer travel until like 2 a.m. Like there is no end to when you stop playing. Like you ever go to like one of these like Swanee Sports Academy or one of these just like factories that have like 1 million basketball courts? Those things are going from 6 a.m. until midnight or later, 1,000 courts. It's so noisy. It's so loud. And listen, I love all that stuff. Don't get me wrong. I do. I think it's all great. But the bandwidth is never ending. Let me tell you what doesn't happen in golf. When it gets dark, people do, they go home. And what happens when it's bedtime? You get to go to sleep. I think in terms of like what makes golf a good sport for a parent with kids is you are confined. Is it confined? You're confined. You are confined within the parameters of normal daytime. You wake up in the morning, you go play. It starts getting dark. Now you got to go home. Like that is a very good parameter to prevent it from being too much of your time. Now, yes, it's expensive, and there's a lot of travel associated with things like that. But when it's nighttime, everybody's going home. You're going to dinner, you're going to sleep, you're waking up doing it again in the morning. And you're also doing it in nice, warm weather locations, too. There's a lot to be said for golf, I would say. A lot to be said for that, indeed. Daniel Aldrich says the Chipper's been making the rounds here a little bit on Kyle Petty and Dale Jr.'s podcast. I'd like to hear that, actually. John Foster says Chipper was great on the podcast there as well. That's good to hear. Good to hear. Good to hear. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute. One more stripper on the comment section. We'll get ready to go after that. Cat Story says, my cousin Tommy Story was a kicker for Tucker back in the 70s. He won a state record one year. Sorry, I don't know which. We lost him last year. I'm sorry to hear that. That's very sad, but what a great high school career, though. That's amazing. And a great program, obviously, for Tucker. Hemingway says, here's my bold prediction. Stetson Bennett's going to mop up this year. The game has seemed to slow down for him during the fourth quarter of the national championship game. Could very well be the case. I mean, I think it's very appropriate. For some reason, this seems to be a hard thing to do, but I think it's very appropriate to sort of have a full appreciation for what Bennett is and what he isn't. You'll never hear me talk about, Bennett being first-round pick, or I don't really mention him in the same breath. I mention, some of the quarterbacks in the current sport who are thought to be great. I don't think of Bennett necessarily in that regard. I think he's had a chance to prove that he might be that. I think he stopped probably just short of doing that. However, there are plenty of things that Bennett has done from a quarterback standpoint that I do think, suggest that he's surpassed a lot of other guys. And by the way, some of the guys I don't think get more attention than he does. He has probably played better than they have played. And when you look at, sort of the history of recent Georgia quarterbacks, no disrespect to other guys who've worn this uniform and guys we may have been, cheering for at the time, those of us who are Georgia fans. I mean, Jake Fromm included. I just think that Bennett last year had a better year for Georgia than Fromm ever did for UGA. And I like Jake, and I've got some fond memory of his time here for UGA, but I don't think Jake in his best season, which was 2018, I don't think that rose to the level of what Bennett did a year ago. And listen, you can say, well, it's credit to Todd Monken. I'm fine with that. Or you can say, well, it's credit to a great defense. Like, I'm fine with that. Like, I don't have any emotional investment in this deal here. If you want to say the entirety of the Bennett performance was based on having a good offensive coordinator and a really good defense, I honestly don't care. Like, I really don't. But the results notwithstanding, he had a better year last year than Fromm did in 2018. Now, who would win on like a Elite 11 competition between the two? I probably don't care about that either. But in terms of what they did on the field, I think that Bennett had the better year. Joe Gagliardi mentioning having a call-in show sometime. So we are going to do that again, and hopefully we're going to do that a lot. We're not doing it right now just because we're sort of kind of getting ready for a lot of different stuff coming up. But we're going to do a lot more of that kind of stuff, Joe. We really are. DT says that Jeff Rancour is the most dominant high school football player I've ever seen. Yeah, I think that as time passes, we forget how good of a high school player, football player Rancour was. And he was a first-round pick, of the Braves. He's probably never quite heading for a football career. But he was a very good player back at a time in which Parkview was really one of the capitals in the state for sure. G. Grace Bama Boy says, give me 5 players from Bama, 5 players from Georgia, 5 players from Texas, and 5 players from Louisiana, and 5 players from Mississippi. Listen, there's a lot of good football across this state, or I should say this region of the country for sure. No doubt about that. Beer cans and baddies talking about what you do find in Georgia compared to other places. We'll go off the air after this. So here's one thing I think is interesting, is there was a time maybe like however many years ago, I don't know that the state of Georgia was considered a capital for quarterbacks. But my gosh, think about how much that's changed right now. I mean, we've got a good crop of like 2024s in the state that you're going to be hearing a lot more about. Like, this has become a really good state for quarterback play, something that didn't used to be true. But one of the things that I think remains true for whatever reason, I don't fully understand this. Like, where are you getting defensive linemen if you don't get them from around here? It's like, how many states even produce elite defensive linemen? Certainly, I don't know that any state does better than Georgia does when it comes to that. But in kind of this surrounding area, the athletic big man, like you just don't really see a lot of athletic big men other places. The kind of guy that can be defensive lineman, that's still the sort of thing that you sort of find in Georgia in a way that you don't really find in other places. And I think that's kind of one of the sort of claims to fame here. The quality of the athletic big guy in this state is still very, very high. All right, we've got to go. Thanks for being here. R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Get that AC unit tuned up to factory fresh specs. R.S. Andrews can do that for you. Also, check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The AJC is the one that had the story with Clayton Kershaw the other day. Our buddy Gabe Burns wrote this. Kershaw really some pointed questions about, Freddie Freeman. Seems like they've kind of made up here a little bit, but you can get more of that online. Also, a lot of challenges related to air travel right now. Bill Torpy's got a good piece on that. And you want a deeper look at how the ACC scheduling model has evolved here and what impact that might have on the SEC. Good coverage of that from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution there as well. You have a great day. Check out the AJC online, ajc.com. Check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. And we'll see you tomorrow morning, 9:45, first and 15, 10 a.m. after that on all the video platforms. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then.